Well, good evening, everybody. I don't know who's going to be watching this tonight, but I've decided at the last minute that I was going to go ahead and do a live review. Um, so if you're either watching this live or you're watching this recorded, hopefully this will help you on our exam tomorrow. As I said, I am doing this at the last minute. So this is coming up just completely off the cuff. I have my notes from last year that I'm going to use, so we'll see how this goes. But like I said, hopefully I didn't announce that I was going to do this, so this is a surprise for you, surprise for me, and we're just going to see if we can get it working. So let me go ahead. I'm going to get started because there is a lot in this particular unit. Unit 8 covers 1945 to 1980. So we're essentially doing the Cold War, and that goes from the end of World War II all the way to the election of Ronald Reagan. And we're covering everything from the beginnings of the Cold War, our relationship with the Soviet Union, the competition we're involved in. We're going to go through the 1950s and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, and as that carries into the 1960s. We're going to talk about two different wars, including the Korean War and the Vietnam War. And then we're also going to talk about culture and how all of this had an effect on the culture of America. So I'm going to go ahead. I got the start right here, and I'm going to be moving stuff around because, like I said, this was a surprise that I was going to do it. So I don't have it as clearly set up as I normally do. But, you know, knowing my luck, it'll just go better than it ever has gone before. So anyway, the focus, and let me just throw this out there to my students who are watching. I sent a remind out via to text, and obviously some of you guys saw it. If you know of anybody else in our class who doesn't have remind or something, you might want to pass this on to them. They can find me live on YouTube. That's all you have to do is just search Lennox U.S. History, and you can find me live on YouTube. But so here we go. The focus, like I said, of period 8 is Cold War tensions. We're going to look at, like I said, the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. There's a lot of social unrest in this unit, from, you know, the Vietnam War to the Civil Rights Movement, going into the 70s, the various different movements that occur. There's going to be a movement as a result of this towards more equality for Americans. Now, I have a couple names down there of people you might want to know. You don't have to know. I mean, these are just some names I threw out there. But there's a lot of people in this unit as well. So just work your way through it. I'm going to be going through big ideas like I normally do. And I'm going to be going quickly because, like I said, I'm going to say this a whole bunch tonight. This was unplanned, so I'm going to be reading a lot of notes to you guys and trying to talk my way through it all. So we are going to start with big idea number 1, and let me fix this. Boy, you get a big picture of me tonight. There we go. All right, big idea number 1 essentially says that the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a decades-long Cold War. The United States, our main goal was the containment of communism. Now, we talked about this in class. What we have here is we have a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. But this doesn't start right at the end of World War II. This actually started prior to the end of World War II. What we see is we see two conflicting ideologies, two competing economic systems that are essentially trying to gain more influence throughout the world. You have the capitalistic economic system of the United States, while the Soviet Union had a communist system. And essentially, when you look at the capitalistic system of America, that was separate from our government system. So we had a constitutional republic, but we also practiced capitalism. With regards to the Soviet Union and communism, their communistic system was built into their government. So the two were coexisting in the Soviet Union. And so what we're going to see is this rivalry start to grow between our two countries. Now, like I said, we started talking about this earlier. We started seeing some conflict earlier, and we can go all the way back to Yalta. And it was at Yalta that you're going to see the big three: the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain start talking about the end of the World War II. And what we decided is we wanted the countries that Germany had occupied prior to the war or during the war, we wanted those countries to have self-determination. We wanted them to be able to choose their own form of government. But Stalin is going to keep those countries under Soviet control because what he is going to claim is that he wants buffer countries between himself, between the Soviet Union and the rest of Europe, because in 2 world wars now, the Soviet Union has been attacked through those countries that are now essentially the I guess the German controlled countries. So Stalin's going to hold tight to those countries, and he's actually going to put in play his own form of government into those areas. The next thing I want to talk about is, that the United States is going to see this action as essentially a violation of the agreements that were made at Yalta. Because when the big three came together and they talked about all this at Yalta, it was kind of agreed upon that self-determination was going to take place, but it's not going to happen. So that's the rivalry that's going to start growing between the Soviet Union and the United States. Now, before I move on any further, I do want to point out that I have the chat open. If you have any questions, you can ask, but you guys, as you watch this live, are about 3 minutes behind where I'm talking. So if I don't see the question, if I don't answer it right away, please just be patient. I will circle back around to it. All right, now back to this big idea, number one. What we're going to see happening in Germany is we're going to see Germany is going to be divided up into 4 zones. The idea was we didn't want Germany to go through the same type of struggles that they went through after World War I. So we're going to divide Germany up among the Allied powers, so the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. And the purpose of this division was to give Germany the support they need to start rebuilding after the war. So that's what we're doing, but Soviets want more. They want, they essentially want a very weak German nation, because Germany has been a thorn in their side for a while. Now, we know that they had a tentative alliance with Germany in the beginning, but they also know that Germany turned on them. Germany was also their enemy in World War I. So what the Soviets want is a weak German nation. What the other Allied powers want is they want a strong democratic nation, and we want to give Germany the tools to do that. So what's going to happen is the Allied powers, the United States, France, and Great Britain, they look and say a strong Germany, a stable Germany is going to benefit all of us. There is no need for punishment. There is no need for reparations, because we'll gain those reparation payments as we help rebuild, and then also as we build an economic relationship with a new Germany. So we divide up the 4 countries, but the Soviets are not willing to return their part of Germany. So we have the eastern part of Germany that the Soviets control, the western part that the other Allies control. The other 3 Allied powers say, man, we have helped rebuild Germany. They're ready for their own self-government. They're ready to go. And the Soviets say, we ain't turning it over. We're holding on to our part. And this is when you see Winston Churchill start to warn us about the Iron Curtain descending on Europe at this point. He is warning us that, the Soviets in building up this Soviet bloc, they have essentially cut off Eastern Europe from the rest of Europe. And there's a metaphorical Iron Curtain that represents a division between the Soviet-controlled zones and the rest of Europe. And so he said, we can't appease this. We can't get it. We can't let this happen. But it does happen. We're going to see the United States is going to start looking at the Soviets and their attempt to expand communism. And this is when we're going to see things like the Long Telegram come out. And what the Long Telegram was written by by George Kennan from the State Department. And George Kennan warned us that the Soviets, this isn't just about keeping Germany weak, that the Soviets have the ultimate goal of expanding communism throughout the world. And this is when we started talking about our policy of containment, containing communism where it already exists, but not allowing it to expand. As a result of this desire to contain communism, you're going to see two major pieces of legislation pass. The Truman Doctrine is essentially a military and economic support that the United States is going to offer anywhere in the world that communism might spread. We started it in Greece and Turkey because they were seen as the first possible countries to fall to communism excuse me, after the war. But then Truman's going to expand that to anywhere that he thinks communism may spread. We also saw that communism had an ability to grow in areas where it's been struck by poverty. And so that's where the Marshall Plan comes in. George Marshall, the Secretary of State, is going to come up with this plan to economically support Western Europe, specifically because we recognize that poverty bred communism. And so healthy economies were basically going to, if you're in a healthy economy, you're more than likely going to choose democracy as your government. You're not going to fall into a communistic style of government because you can stand on your own 2 feet and you're not going to be reliant on a government to do for you. So this is why Marshall said we need to invest in Western Europe to rebuild the economies there to prevent the spread of communism. And we're going to give like $12 billion of aid into Western Europe to help them rebuild. Another thing that's going to happen as a response of the spread of communism is we're going to see a new world alliance form, and that's going to be NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is going to be a military pact that was created to defend Western Europe against the spread of communism. But not to be outdone, Stalin's going to create his own alliance, and that's going to be the Warsaw Pact, which included all of the Eastern Bloc countries that were under Soviet control. So now we have not only is it the United States versus the Soviet Union, now it's NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. So as this Cold War starts to grow, we see growth of other areas of competition, one of them being the arms race. The United States was the first country to drop an atomic bomb. The Soviets were not far behind. You're going to see the Soviets get their first bomb in 1949. And that's going to spur the arms race where it's just going to be one for one. Who can get the biggest bomb built the fastest? So the Soviets got an atomic bomb in 49. In 52, the U.S. got the hydrogen bomb. In 53, the Soviets got the hydrogen bomb. And what we're seeing is the beginning of a existence called MAD. And MAD stood for Mutually Assured Destruction. As the arms race grows, so does the reality that no one really wants to use their weapons. Because once one of us uses our nuclear weapons, others are going to, they're going to respond. And that will put us at all-out nuclear war, which nobody wants. So the arms race, in a sense, maintained peace in the world. Because no one wants to use those weapons. We're going to stick to conventional warfare instead of going to nuclear warfare. And like I said, it's kind of a crazy thought, but what we're going to see happen is that mutually assured destruction is going to save lives over time. But that didn't mean it stopped war. We're going to see war, and the first place we're going to see it is in Korea. So this ideological divide that existed between democracy or democratic capitalism and communism were just not exclusive between the United States and the Soviet Union. It also occurred in other countries, and one of those countries was Korea. And Korea was split between those who supported communism and those who supported democracy. And this peninsula is going to become basically an exercise in this battle between communism and capitalism. Now, the Soviets and the Chinese are going to rally behind the North, and the United States is going to support the South with the help of the UN. The UN is helping the United States in this fight as well. And what essentially happens is the Korean War ends up being a proxy war. And what that means is, by proxy, the Cold War belligerents, the United States and the Soviet Union, are going to attempt to further their goals, to spread their ideas through the Korean War. I mean, that's essentially what's happening, is you have the division in Korea, and both sides, both the Soviets and the United States, saw this as an opportunity to go in and help their respective sides, to help advance their vision of the proper government, the proper economic systems for the world. And so the Korean War is going to be one of the first battles within the Cold War. Now, we talk about this Cold War, and I didn't mention this at the beginning. A Cold War represents a war that's never fought. And so the Cold War itself was never fought, but you did have battles within the Cold War. General MacArthur is going to be the original commander-in-chief of the United Nations and U.S. forces. He is going to successfully push North Korea almost to the boundary of China. When that happened, China is going to enter the war, and that's going to kind of change the dynamics of the war. The Chinese are going to be able to push the United States and the UN back to the 38th parallel, and the war is actually going to end in a stalemate. To be honest, if you look at a map, the South Koreans probably gained a little bit of territory. Not a lot, but they did gain a little bit of territory in this fight. But then the war ends, and it's a stalemate, it's a tie, it's an armistice. We're not going to fight anymore. And to this day, Korea is divided between North and South Korea, communism and capitalism/democracy. Okay? So that's big idea number one. Moving on to big idea number two. Americans debated policies designed to expose suspected communists within the United States, even as both parties supported the broader strategy of containing communism. Bottom line, there was support across the political spectrum of stopping the spread of communism. Containment was the U.S. policy, and everybody stood behind it. But what we're going to start seeing happen is, just like back in the 1920s, we're going to see paranoia start to surround the potential for communism infiltrating our country. That was always our fear. Our fear has always been that communists are going to come in and essentially take us down from within. What's going to happen is you're going to see Congress is going to form a committee to start essentially seeking out anybody who was considered a communist sympathizer. This is going to be the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And this committee, the HUAC committee is what we refer to it, is they fed on the paranoia of Americans. They're going to, reach the, they're going to be fearful that communism has reached the federal government, that it has gotten into the military, and they are going to start, seeking out anybody who could be tied to communism. And they're going to start having hearings, and they're going to, question government officials. They're going to question civilians as well. And you're going to have a lot of finger pointing in this time period, because we're going to be in this, quote, Red Scare. And it's kind of like, they even put out advertisements. Can you recognize a communist? What does a communist look like? And you had neighbors pointing fingers at other neighbors saying, well, look, he drives a red car. He must be a communist. Or look, he doesn't have a flag in front of his house. He must be a communist. And they came up with these crazy ideas for what designated someone as a potential communist. And then they reported them to the government. And that's kind of what what happened with the Red Scare. Now, there was one guy, Joseph McCarthy. He was a senator from Wisconsin, and he is going to raise the height, the fear level of communism in our country, when he's going to start coming out saying, I have all this proof that there are communists in our State Department. And he is going to start having hearings, and they're called the McCarthy hearings. And not only that, when he doesn't essentially out any State Department communists, he's going to say, well, they're not in the State Department, they're in the Army. And then the Army McCarthy hearings are going to start on TV. And essentially, this becomes must-watch TV. And, it's not just, government officials, civilians. People in Hollywood got attacked. You had the Hollywood 10 who got blacklisted from Hollywood because they were suspected communists. And, so, if you got that communist label on you, it was almost impossible to get it off. And so it ruined a lot of lives, and it caused a lot of damage to people's, reputations and stuff like that. But this was the fear that was permeating our society. And so it's easy for us to sit back and say, oh, the Cold War, United States versus the Soviet Union. But if you put yourself in that position, you put yourself in the 1950s, where these large, huge bombs that we have never experienced are being created over and over and over again. And you hear stories about, how the communists, how the Soviet Union had gone in and taken over all these Eastern, European countries. And then now they're starting to talk about communism coming into our country. And we know in the past there's been anarchy with socialists and stuff. We saw it in the 1920s. I mean, it actually existed in our country. You can kind of start to understand the fear that was developing in our country. The fear that we are not 100% safe unless we know everybody around us. And so we are very susceptible to allowing the government a little bit more latitude, a little bit more freedom, taking away some of our rights, just to, quote, keep us safe. And the Red Scare demonstrates how far that can go if we're not too careful. Okay? All right, that's big idea number 2. Big idea number 3. The economy is going to grow significantly in the 1950s, and this is going to create the occasion for the baby boom, cultural conformity, and an increase in migration. So after World War II, Truman is going to sign the GI Bill. Also, the official name is the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. And the Servicemen's Readjustment Act basically gave World War II veterans access to free college education and low-interest home and business loans. So unlike World War I, where we said we're going to give you a bonus in 10, 20 years, the GI Bill says we're going to set you up right now, either with an education or loans to start a business or to buy a home and stuff like that. And so this is going to lead to, a lot of GIs. They're coming home, they're getting married, or they got married just before the war. They're coming home, they have some extra money because no one spent any money during the 1930s or early 40s because of the Depression and then rationing and stuff. So we have disposable income, and the baby boom is going to take off. And the baby boom will take off, and you're going to see this post-war population spike which results from these men coming home. I mean, 50 million babies are going to be born during the baby boom. And this is going to mean we need a lot of places to live. So you're going to see people start leaving the cities. They're going to start moving into the suburbs, and we need houses. And the Levitt brothers came up with this cool way to essentially mass manufacture homes where they could literally build an entire home in a week. And so Levittown became one of the first model suburbs of the United States. And when you're in the suburbs, you don't just have your neighborhood there. You also are seeing schools built in the area. You're seeing shopping built in the area. And the suburbs are kind of becoming self-contained communities. So you don't have to leave the suburbs to go to the city to get stuff you need. You can get everything you want in the suburbs. And this leads to the rise of what we call suburbanization of our country, meaning a lot of people are leaving the cities and going to the suburbs. Another term for this was white flight. White Americans are leaving again the cities to go into the suburbs. And that's going to leave some repercussions in the cities because that's going to, as essentially the money is leaving the cities because people who can afford to move do. And that's going to draw down the economic sustainability of urban lives. And that's going to have to be dealt with during the 1960s, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Speaking of movement, there is going to be a lot of internal migration in our country. One thing where you're going to see a lot of people, I already talked about the suburbs, but you're going to see a lot of people move down into what is known as the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt is the southern half of our country. A couple things are going to lead to this migration south. One of it is the defense industries that are booming now because of the Cold War and the arms race. They're going to start building their factories down in the southern sector of our country. They're attracted to go down there because a new invention hits America, and it's the air conditioning, and that makes life in the South that much more enjoyable. So the Sun Belt is going to become a destination for industry. Also, we're going to start seeing destination for retirees and people like that because now it's much more, how it is in Texas. Without air conditioning in the summer, we'd all be dead. We'd be dying and we wouldn't be dead, but come on, how much we'd be complaining about that. So, thank goodness for our air conditioning. Thank goodness for whoever invented it back in the 1950s. So that's also going to create economic and political blocks throughout our country. Now, as our country grew during the 1950s, this idea of conformity started to grow. We started looking at others, lives in the suburbs and saying, well, how does my life compare to that guy? And we started having this vision of what the perfect American lifestyle was. And quite honestly, excuse me, guys, shh, hush. Quite honestly, what is going on is that another new medium of technology has come forth, and that's the television. And all of a sudden, we're watching these television shows with these, quote, perfect families. And they become the model for the American family. And so everyone tries to be like those families, like the Nelsons on Ozzie and Harriet, or Cleavers on Leave It to Beaver, or any of them. That's the ultimate, if we can just reach that. So in the 1950s, you got to understand, 55 million households had televisions in them. So that idea of conformity spreads very quickly because we start to see the similar messages on these TV shows. We start to see, cultural norms on these episodes. And so everyone's striving to be like them. Well, you did have, another form sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Another form of communication that's going to lead to conformity, and that's advertising. Advertising marketing is going to grow during this time, and they're going to start using advertising not just to tell you about their products, but tell you how their products make you feel. And that's what advertising does. It appeals to our emotions. And, will you feel left out if you don't get this latest gadget that everyone else is getting, that FOMO, that fear of missing out. And that's what advertising is going to start doing. It's going to start appealing to emotions. And the other thing that's going to start coming up is credit. Americans don't have the money today. Don't worry. You can get credit and you can pay for it later. And that's going to become the new way of purchasing everything. So you can see the changes that are occurring during this time. Now, not everybody is happy with the changes. We have a generation called the Beat Generation that's going to start pushing back a bit against it. A representative of that generation is J.D. Salinger. Salinger is going to write Catcher in the Rye. And he's basically going to paint American culture, paint this conformity as essentially a culture of phonies. And he goes, and it's bland and it's boring because everybody's the same. And what makes us great is our differences. And so that's going to spur this beatnik movement. And the beatniks rejected American conformity. They're going to be like, we're going to be anything but conformed to American society. And the beatniks are later going to grow into what we call the hippie movement in the 1960s and the counterculture movement as we go into the 1970s. So these are the kind of the early stages of protest in our country. All right, big idea number 4. Big idea number 4 says that gains were made for civil rights in the 1940s and the 1950s, which set the stage for further gains in the 1960s. All right, we know coming out of World War II that there's going to be several steps that are going to be made to help with civil rights. 1947, Truman is going to desegregate the military. 1947 is also the year that Jackie Robinson broke the race barrier in Major League Baseball. As we go into the 1950s, segregation is still the law of the land. And we're going to have a monumental Supreme Court case in 1954 called Brown v. Board of Education. And Brown v. Board of Education, basically undercut and overruled Plessy versus Ferguson. Because you remember, Plessy v. Ferguson said separate but equal is fine. But Brown v. Board said, separate but equal is inherently unequal. And that violates the 14th Amendment. And so you're going to see the order to start desegregating the schools. Now, there's going to be a huge push of Southern resistance to this. You're going to see massive resistance when, through the state legislatures. The state legislatures of the South are going to start passing legislation to block the integration of school. Heck, some of them went as far as closing public schools so they didn't have to integrate them. There was this Southern Manifesto where over 100 Southern congressmen publicly rejected the decision of Brown v. Board of Education. And that's going to lead to threats of, like I said, school closures and violence against black students. Where we first see this come into fruition is with the Little Rock Nine. Little Rock, Arkansas Central High School. It's going to be the question of state versus federal power. Orville Farbus, the governor of Arkansas, says, the state controls education. Federal government has no say here. And so he is going to block 9 African-American students from entering into Central High School in their school year. Well, Eisenhower's having none of that, and he is going to send the 101st Airborne Unit down to escort these students to school every single day, thereby integrating the school. But you got to understand this pushback against integration, it has a huge effect because by 1964, 10 years later, only 2% of public schools in the South had been desegregated. So it's gonna be a mountain to climb to desegregate our public schools. Another major movement that's going to start in 1954 is going to be the Montgomery bus boycott. And that's going to start when Rosa Parks is going to refuse to give up her seat on the bus. She was an employee of the NAACP. She put herself out there to get arrested. Once she got arrested, this is going to spark the Montgomery bus boycott. Martin Luther King Jr., this is when we first come into contact with him. He is going to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. And it's going to, this boycott's going to go on for over a year, where the African Americans in Montgomery are going to refuse to ride the public buses. In the end, it's going to basically force the authorities to desegregate the buses. You're also going to see going into the late 50s, early 60s, the sit-in movements. We talked about the Greensboro Four, where they sat in at the lunch counters to try to desegregate that. It's going to result in a lot of mass arrests. You're going to see, but you're also going to see the eventual desegregation of public spaces. So all the efforts of these early civil rights movements in the early 50s are going to lead to change going forward, which causes me to change to big idea. I hit that twice. Number 5. Big idea number 5. So building on that progress of the 40s and 50s, we're going to see the civil rights movement start to win major victories in the 60s with this significant legislation that outlawed racial discrimination. So we've seen all the work that was done. We talked about the Montgomery bus boycott. We talked about the sit-in movement. We didn't talk about it, but you also want to know about the Freedom Rides and Freedom Summer. These are terms that you need to know. And what this is going to lead to is, sorry, I keep hitting this and I didn't mean to do that. And what this is going to lead to is eventually it's going to culminate in March of 1963 with the March on Washington. This is the highlight of the civil rights movement up to this point. This is when Martin Luther King Jr. is going to lead between 200,000 and 300,000 supporters of civil rights legislation to Washington, where he stands on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and he gives his I Have a Dream speech. And he starts the speech talking about essentially the mistreatment of African Americans in our country, but then that speech is going to then evolve into the hope he has for the future where we can all live together. As a result of the civil rights movement in 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 64 is going to be signed into law by President Johnson, and it made discrimination based on race, sex, or religion illegal. All right. That's going to be followed up the next year by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. It's going to get rid of, the poll taxes. It's going to get rid of the literacy tests and stuff like that. They're making progress, but some people are not happy with the progress or the speed of the progress. And so you're going to have alternative approaches to civil rights. And the big one you should be familiar with is Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a critic of Martin Luther King. He was a critic of his optimism and his nonviolent methods. And he saw white racism as something that was unavoidable. He saw it as that the separation of races was the pragmatic way forward. Just keep them separate. And we've seen people like this before. I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but he started the Black Star Line in the 1920s. I can see Marcus. No, it wasn't Marcus Garvey. Was it Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey had the same idea. He said, I'm going to start a ship line that will take African Americans from America back to Africa because we have to live separately. And Malcolm X kind of had the same idea. You're also going to see violence this idea that white violence can only be stopped by black violence. And there was still a lot of violence. There was still a lot of violence going on in the South and stuff. And so you're going to see a rise of a movement to counteract white violence with black violence. And that's where the Black Panther movement's going to come in. And they were more extreme and they were militant, and they were known for increasing conflict with the police and the federal government. A lot of this is going to lead to, pockets of riots and stuff like that. Probably the most famous in '65 is going to be the LA race riots, where a black motorist was arrested by white officers. The riots are going to grow from that, and you're going to see 30 people die during these riots and massive property damage as well. So not every, we're still growing. We're still figuring it out. We have some, growing pains is essentially what we're going through here, where some people support MLK and the movement he's running, but other people are saying it's not fast enough, or it's not good enough, or we got to get better. And so that's where you see some of the conflict. But you also see the inspiration of other civil rights movement. During this time, you're going to see the role of the women. The women's movement is going to get a kickstart during the 1960s with the publication of a book called The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. And she basically states that boredom and the imprisonment of American housewife is putting her needs behind those of her family. So essentially, she said it's time for women to stop putting themselves last, put ourselves first. The cult of domesticity, we need to get rid of it. Women should seek professional careers. That should be their goal. The National Organization of Women is going to be formed, now, NOW, and they're going to support this idea, and there's going to be a push for the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment was basically an amendment to the Constitution to guarantee equal rights, based not on sex, but, so women could get equal rights in our society. But there's pushback to that, because some women thought that Betty Friedan and now were going too far, that they were giving up the feminine aspect of being women that we should also embrace. And one of the people who pushed back, who's going to fight against the Equal Rights Amendment, is Phyllis Schlafly. And Schlafly is going to argue that the traditional role for women, there's nothing wrong with that, and we should hold on to that as well. So, but what I'm trying to get across to you here is that the civil rights movement led to other movements. It inspired other movements. Now, I mentioned the women, but there's going to be other movements such as Latinos, American Indians, Asian Americans, there's the women again, and gay and lesbian Americans. All of these folks are going to be inspired by the civil rights movement. For example, the Chicano movement, the American Indian movement, the gay movement, they all started as a result. For Latinos, what they discovered was, if you think back to when we studied the Great Depression, and if you remember correctly, Hoover signed in the Mexican Repatriation Act, where a whole bunch of Mexican Americans were deported back to Mexico. And they're like, we don't want to see that happen again. And so you're going to see the fight for Mexican-American rights during this time period. Cesar Chavez is going to rise up, and he's going to fight for collective bargaining for agricultural employees during this time, for the farmers and for those who are, the Mexican-Americans coming in and working for the farms. So he's essentially trying to unionize the agricultural industry. The American Indian Movement, or AIM, comes together in 1968. And what they want to do is they want to start reclaiming their tribal traditions. They want self-determination for their Native American nations, because Native Americans have found themselves living in a system of poverty. So they're burdened by systemic poverty, and so they're looking for a way out of there. And one of their major protests is going to be on Alcatraz. They're going to take Alcatraz Island, which was an abandoned federal land, and they're basically going to say, this is our land now. And it was our land before treaties were signed and everything like that, so we're taking it back. So they're going to hold on to that island for nearly 19 months. But that protest is going to become the cornerstone for the American Indian movement during this time period. The natives are calling for what we promised all these other countries throughout the world, and that's self-determination. They wanted to control their land, they wanted to control their education, and they wanted to control law enforcement within their tribal reservations and stuff. You're also going to have the gay and lesbian movement is going to kick off. And what's going to spur that is what's called the Stonewall riot that took place in 1969. The Stonewall Inn was a well-known gay establishment. It's going to be raided in 1969 by the police due to anti-gay laws that were on the books. And the resistance is they're going to push back. It's going to turn into a riot, but there's going to be continued protest against it. And so we're going to start seeing laws about homosexuality start to be overturned. So again, I'm flying through this, but just understand the power of the civil rights movement that started in the 40s and 50s and the lasting effect it had, not just on the movement for African Americans, but other minority groups throughout our country during this time and beyond. All right, big idea number 7. Worldwide post-decolonization was the occasion for increasing Cold War involvement for both the Soviet Union and the United States. So we're going back to the Cold War now. Let me take a breath. I'm going fast. Okay, here we go. You're going to see the decolonization of nations throughout the world. And this is going to lead to more competition, if you will, between the creation of democratic governments and communist governments. In Latin America, for example, Guatemala is going to essentially be under a pro-Soviet government. The United States is going to lead a coup to overthrow this socialist government under the banner of containment. We don't want communism, especially in the Western Hemisphere. So we're going to support in numerous places governments that come in, and we'll give them the tools and everything they need to overthrow communist government, but they're pro-U.S. Well, one place that doesn't work is down in Cuba. Fidel Castro is going to essentially overthrow the government there, and he is going to ally himself with the Soviet Union. And I'll get back to him here in just a minute. Well, let me just talk about him, because I don't know if I don't know if he's in my notes, so I'm going to tell you he's probably not. When Castro overthrows the democratic government that was supported by the United States, we are going to place an embargo on Cuba, stop trading with them. At that point, Cuba is going to look to the Soviet Union as a new trading partner. The Soviet Union is like, oh, yes, so we're so in there. And not only that, while we're friends trading, why don't you let us put a few nuclear weapons on your island? And we're going to find out that the Soviets are going to start putting nuclear weapons on the island of Cuba. This is going to lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was 13 days in our history during Kennedy's administration, where we get, moments away from nuclear war. We're up to DEFCON 2, and we're ready to go to war. Fortunately, it de-escalated, but Castro remained in power, and that communist nation has been 90 miles off the coast of our country for some time. So we're going to start doing everything we can to prevent other communist countries from coming into the Western Hemisphere and gaining a tactical access to the United States. And so we're going to see, like I said, in Latin America, in Guatemala, and Nicaragua, places like that. But it's not just there. We're also looking in other parts of the world. The Middle East, the CIA is going to work to overthrow the government in Iran. We just talked about that in my class today, how they overthrew the elected government because they were anti-U.S., and they put in the Shah of Iran as a leader who turned out to be a dictator, but he was pro-U.S. And so that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to support governments that support us, essentially. And so we're going to see that, Latin America and the Middle East and in Asia. Where we really see it is in Indochina. Indochina, which was the French Indochina, it was a French colony. After World War II, we're going to see France trying to regain control of French Indochina, and you're going to have pushback by communists in North Vietnam. North Indochina, which will become North Vietnam, and North and South Vietnam are going to be divided very similar to North and South Korea. Ho Chi Minh is the leader of the North Vietnamese. He is going to want to establish a communist government in the North, but he wants all of Vietnam to be under that government. The South, they're going to help establish a democratic government. And the United States is going to economically support that South Vietnamese government. Now, this is falling under all the doctrines that have come into place. We have the Eisenhower Doctrine that said we're going to help governments in the Middle East and in Asia to help fight against communism. And then later we're going to have the Nixon Doctrine, and we're going to have, so all these doctrines are taking place, and they all say the same thing. We're going to do whatever we have to do to stop the spread of communism. We can trace this all the way back to the Long Telegram, where it says that the goal of communists is to expand worldwide, and we're the ones that are trying to stop that from happening. Kennedy is going to, in 1961, after Eisenhower leaves office, Kennedy is going to start sending advisors into Vietnam to help the South Vietnamese, because essentially what happens is a civil war starts in Vietnam between North and South Korea. And so we're going to send advisors in to help support the Vietnamese. Now, I want you to think about this, because we're getting more involved, and more involvement militarily throughout the world means we need to start building our military bigger and bigger. Well, before Eisenhower left office, he's going to warn the country. He's going to warn us against an ever-increasing military-industrial complex. And what that essentially means is we are slowly drifting towards a society in which the military becomes the filter of every single decision we make, where we're essentially becoming a military state first. And he warns that that's not who we are as a nation. And so that's kind of always in the back of our heads as we're going forward. But we still want to try to contain communism. So we're trying to find a balance between all of that. Now, next big idea, number 8, is going to actually talk about this war in Vietnam, where it says that this Vietnam War was fought under the rubric of the communist containment. And it created these deep divisions throughout America, and it made us start questioning, what is our place in the world? Like I said, Kennedy sends advisors to Vietnam. What's going to happen next after Kennedy's assassinated is Johnson is going to go to Congress, because he is going to talk. There's going to be an incident called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And what this led to is it's disputed whether or not it really happened. Kind of like, remember the USS Maine just before the Spanish-American War, where we said, oh, remember the Maine, and we said it blew up and it was attacked by the Spanish, but we found out it really wasn't attacked by the Spanish. It was a boiler that blew up. We have Johnson telling us that we had 2 ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is off the coast of North Vietnam, that were attacked by North Vietnamese, and we have engaged them because we sent out our planes as a defense against those North Vietnamese attacks. When this happens, Congress is going to pass the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which essentially gave Johnson a blank check to do whatever he deemed necessary to protect American interest in Vietnam. So they essentially gave Johnson a blank check to wage war against the North Vietnamese. We never had a declaration of war, but we are actually going into war because we are going to defend democracy and capitalism over in Asia. We're going to fight in this war for over 10 years. And over those 10 years, we're going to see 50,000 Americans, over 50,000 Americans die. Which, compared to the Vietnamese, the Vietnamese lost nearly 2 million. So our numbers didn't compare, but that was still 50,000 lives that were lost. And the United States is going to eventually withdraw from Vietnam in 1973 in the midst of national protests going on, where Americans are saying, that these protests started in the late 60s. They're going to go through the 1970s, saying, what are we doing in Vietnam fighting this war that was never declared? That's a big thing. We're fighting a war that was not declared. And then what we realized through several different events, such as the Tet Offensive and such like that, we realized that we weren't doing as well in Vietnam as the government had been telling us all along. In 1968, we discovered that the government had been lying to us about the state of the Vietnam War. They've been telling us we're winning when we're not. And so this leads to what's known as the credibility gap, a gap that exists between the United States government and the public. And the gap is based on the fact that we realize that the government has never been fully honest with us about this war. And it's going to be it's going to be next to impossible to bridge that gap, because the distrust of government is going to continue to grow. And that's all due to the Vietnam War. And as I'm moving on, I'm realizing, man, we spent 2.5 days talking about Vietnam, and here I'm only spending about 2.5 minutes talking about it. I think to understand Vietnam, you just have to understand the effects of Vietnam on our culture. And the effects it's going to have also on our role in the world going forward. But I'm moving forward to big idea number 9. I'm sorry I keep hitting that button. Big idea number 9 says that the youth culture of the 1960s was defined by a rejection of social, political, and economic norms of their parents' generation. Now, we talked about during the 50s how you had a youth generation called the beatniks who rebelled against the conformity of the 1950s. What we see in the 1960s is this counterculture movement who essentially are going to, young people just casting off societal restraint. You know, they're not going to be restrained by what society says they should be or how they should act. They're going to start rebelling against that with different styles of clothes and music. You're going to see a lot of experimental drug use during this time. So essentially everything their parents were, they're not going to be. We're just going to reject, and we're going to reflect a complete opposite of who you are. And this is when we're going to see things like the Woodstock Music Festival, where almost 500,000 people, it's like 400,000 people come together for this music festival for days. And we're going to see changes in attitudes of young people going forward, changes about sexuality and free expression of love and stuff like that. And so that's going to be, the big thing of this countercultural movement that occurs during the 1960s. We're also going to see, there's really no place else to stick this, but I want to talk to you about some Supreme Court decisions that were made during the 1960s under the Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren. A couple cases you might want to be familiar with. Engel versus Vitale, which was about the separation of church and state, which said that it didn't allow any more Bible reading or teacher-led prayers in public schools. You had Miranda versus Arizona, which, is about, your Miranda rights, that you have to know that you have the right to remain silent. So these are some of the cases that were introduced during the 1960s, and a lot of them had to do with protecting the rights of Americans, especially when it came to like law enforcement and stuff like that. So you might want to be familiar with those. But I'm going to keep moving on, and I'm going to talk about big idea number 10. Lyndon Johnson and his Great Society, that this is a domestic agenda, because it's very easy to forget about the domestic policies that are going on while we're fighting this Cold War. And during Johnson's administration, he is going to pass the Great Society that it's carrying on or is building upon the New Deal, which is what Johnson was trying to do, was create his own version of the New Deal that was going to be fighting against poverty. But it's considered a very high mark in the growth of American liberalism in our country. And Johnson, what he's going to do is when he becomes president, he's going to declare a war on poverty. And he's going to create the Office of Economic Opportunity, which is in place to start building or to create literacy programs and job training like Job Corps and stuff like that to help America's poverty, those who are economically challenged, to help them, get out of poverty through education and through training and stuff like that. Some Great Society programs that you've got to be familiar with: Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare provided health insurance for people who are over the age of 65. Now, that differs from Medicaid, because what Medicaid did was provide health insurance for low-income people or people with disabilities. So Medicare and Medicaid both provided health insurance, but Medicare was for the elderly, Medicaid was for the impoverished or those with disabilities. These liberal ideas, as they start to grow during the 1960s under Johnson, started this idea that any problem we have could be fixed by government. And so this idea that government has to fix all our problems reached its height in the 1960s. And really, you can almost make the argument that that is going to add to the pushback against government, the distrust of government, because government can't solve all our problems. So they can't solve the problems in Vietnam. They can't solve our problems with poverty going forward. So that gap, that credibility gap, is starting to grow. And that's going to take us to Nixon's administration. Big idea number 11, the 70s saw growing clashes between conservatives and liberals over social and cultural issues, the power of the federal government, and movements for greater individual rights. So Nixon's elected in 1968, and our role in Vietnam is going to come to an end. He's going to introduce Vietnamization. He is going to, we're slowly start pulling our troops out of Vietnam. That doesn't mean it was a clean break. We invaded Cambodia and stuff. That's going to cause more protests and stuff. But what we're going to see going into the 70s is our society is going to go into a transition. We're going to go through a recession economically. We're going to see a decline in our economic activity. We're in the early 70s. We're going to see our economic growth start to slow down. We're going to see unemployment go up. We're going to see inflation go up, and that's stagflation. And we talked a little bit about that today, and we talked a little bit about that last week. And stagflation becomes the economic basis of the 1970s. And what you're going to find is no one has an answer for it. Federal spending, they're going to try to cut federal spending, but that's just going to lead more to more economic downturns. And essentially, the public confidence in our government is going to quickly start going lower and lower and lower, because the confidence that the government could right the wrongs in our society, that vision of our government begins to crack. Up until the late 60s into the 70s, we always trusted our government. We believed our government could fix the problems that we faced. And what we came to the realization was in the 1970s is we were wrong. They can't fix our problems. They tell us they can fix them, but they're not. It's not happening. And then if we just didn't trust government enough at this point, here comes the Watergate scandal. And we talked about this. The Watergate scandal was this political scandal involving the Nixon administration, in which the Democratic presidential campaign was spied on by, agents for the Nixon campaign. The investigation is going to grow when journalists start to look into Nixon's involvement. Congress is going to get involved. Nixon's going to deny any involvement. He's going to try to cover up any involvement. And then the tapes come out. He said, I recorded everything, and the tapes come out. And first there's 18 and a half minutes missing from the tapes, and we're like, what is this guy hiding from us? And then the 18 and a half minutes become public, and well, now we know what he was hiding from us. And Nixon is going to be impeached. He's going to be impeached by the House Judiciary Committee. But before that impeachment could reach the Senate for the trial, he is going to resign in order to prevent himself being removed from office. And then, of course, as we talked about, Ford is going to come in as the next president. And when Ford comes in, he is going to pardon Nixon. We're going to see going through the 1970s when Jimmy Carter comes into office, he's not going to have an answer for stagflation. He's going to deal with his own issues like the Iran hostage crisis and how to handle that. He does get a good feather in his cap with the Camp David Accords, in that he helped negotiate a peace between Egypt and Israel. But that wasn't enough to overshadow the failing economy of the United States and the lack of confidence we had in our government and the lack of confidence other countries had in us, because we just weren't that superpower anymore. I'm trying to think what else I can cover. Let me do the last bullet point here, and that's going to be the growing concern of the environmental degradation led to the rise of the environmental movement. We know that in the late 1960s, Rachel Carson's going to write a book called Silent Spring that shed a light on the dangers of pesticides and pollution and stuff like that. Under Nixon's administration, he's going to start the Environmental Protection Agency. He's also going to create OSHA, which is safety in the workplace. But we're going to see various natural man-made, or not natural, man-made environmental disasters during this time period, such as you're going to see oil spills happen. You're going to have the crisis at 3 Mile Island when a nuclear plant melted down and stuff like that. And all of this is going to lead to the growth of more demand for environmental safeties throughout our society. And so the Environmental Protection Agency is going to put in place a regulatory agency that put limits on the environmental impact of, different industries on the land, on air and water. You're going to see the Clean Air Act passed. You're going to see the Endangered Species Act passed. All of these with the goal of protecting the American environment. And that's it. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, there's stuff I didn't talk about, obviously, but these are the big ideas of Unit 8. So, Cold War, civil rights movement, the wars, Korea and Vietnam, and the attempt to contain. I think a lot of times I refer to this Unit 8 as, I think there's 6 C's. You can remember. Let me see if I can remember. There's communism, there's containment, there's consumerism, there's civil rights. I'm not going to remember the other 2. But think of those as you start studying for tomorrow's test. I think that's about it. I didn't see any questions come in on the chat. Let me just check one more thing to make sure. Yeah, it's live chat. So I'm going to ramble now for a little bit because I'm noticing on the live screen that I am only on big idea number 11. So you guys have some catching up to do. So essentially, guys, as you start to study this unit, break it down into sections. You can go by president, use your president charts. You can start using those to study. You can go by, if you want to go by decades. But what I would do is I would look at the Cold War throughout. Then I'd look at the civil rights movement throughout. And then I would look at other things throughout this time period, and hopefully you can kind of bring it all together. You can go back through this video and look at all the big ideas and use those big ideas to help you, understand what's going on. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much Unit 8 in a nutshell. So again, I am rambling. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it on the wait screen. And I'm going to put something in the chat asking for questions. And if I see any questions come in, I will come back live and we'll chat some more. So I'm going to go back to the title screen. And then is oversimplified study worthy content? Daxon, I'm assuming you're talking about the oversimplified videos. And I've used those before, and they're good. Just make sure you're looking at the oversimplified U.S. history, because I know they have both oversimplified world history as well. So I think that's good content if you want a quick review over some of the wars and some of the events that take place. I think that's a great resource, absolutely. So go for it. Like I said, I've used it before, so I wholly, anything that helps you remember the content, go for it. Honestly, just listening to me is not always going to do it. There's other people out there who have great resources, and you guys need to make use of all those great resources, especially over these next few weeks as we're getting ready for the AP exam. So I'm going to go ahead and type this in there, and before we get going. Let's see if you guys see that. And hopefully, Daxon, you will see my answer to you. But anyway, so I got the dogs here. I don't know if they're going to jump up. You've heard them barking because, they didn't realize we were doing this tonight, so I didn't have to chat with them about behavior. But they're both here. And let's see who comes up and who doesn't. You going to come up? You get up here. Come here. Come on, here comes Flynn. Flynn's up here. So Flynn's feeling good tonight. Yes, so Flynn's up here. Gilligan's down here. Like I said, I'm just rambling, so I'll just keep rambling for just a few more minutes because it looks like you guys are slowly catching up to where I am. I'm not seeing any other questions come in on the chat. So, but if there's anything you want to know, just now is the time to ask. So, let me just sit here for a few minutes. I know, he's talking. He's talking. He's got stuff to say tonight. All right, Off. Go ahead. Get it. Get off. Go ahead. Off. There you go. Come up, Gil. Gilligan coming up. No, get out of the way, Flynn. Flynn gets very jealous when Gilligan's getting attention. So, all right, get back. Flynn. Come here, Gilligan. Up. Gilligan, up. Come on, Gil. Come on. Up. There we go. Come here, Gil. Oh, see? Here they both come. So, okay. All right, guys. I'm not seeing any questions. I'm going to put the title screen on. It's going to sit here for a while. I'll turn off my microphone, but if I see any questions, I'll come back. Okay, guys, I am not seeing any questions. So I'll just hang out here for just another minute. But I think that's going to be it for this evening. Sorry, got two different screens going here. I don't want to sit here and you guys are going to be staring at this screen for a little bit and then just thinking nothing's going on. So I'm going to go off one more time. I'm going to give it about 30 seconds on my end, which should take you through the original title screen that I put up there. Any more questions come up, I'll be happy to answer them. So, and Flynn is still talking to me. Yeah. All right, I am not seeing any questions come out, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off and tell you guys good night. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.